Dark Souls 2, Fallout 4, Ninja Theory's Devil May Cry, Super Mario Sunshine. What do these 4 games have in common? Well, arguably, they are the most divisive mainline entries in their respective franchises. Of course, there's no single reason why each of these games have die-hard defenders and detractors, but if I were to select one of the primary reasons, it would be an alteration of the core formula. Often what games will do is find a gameplay formula that works, and when it comes time for a sequel, certain details will be added on top of the formula where necessary in order to enhance the experience. But the formula itself won't be changed. This is why, I think, the original Halo trilogy, or most of the Soulsborne games, were so beloved, for instance. At root, the formula is the same, though the details change. When they started to experiment with the core formula too much, say with Dark Souls 2 or Halo 4 and 5, longtime fans protested. Yet, simultaneously, it can't be denied that there is a sizable number of people who love those games precisely because they were different. Now, who is right and who is wrong in these debates? Well, in my opinion, sometimes the experimentation pays off. Resident Evil 4 might be the prime example. It's a very different game from its predecessors, but it's generally loved, even if there are those who think that it took the franchise in the wrong direction. But then there are games where fans generally agree that the experimentation was a bad decision, like with Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Even if that game isn't horrible per se, turning a platformer into a game about cars arguably wasn't the right decision for that franchise. Ultimately, the result of experimentation with formula is subjective and tends to foster fiery feelings of love and hate. And it's for that reason that I've enthusiastically recused myself from these types of conversations. It's also for that reason that I have refused to talk about a certain game from a franchise that I'm most known on YouTube for discussing. I am of course talking about Silent Hill 4, The Room. Generally speaking, in the Silent Hill fandom, the first 3 games are considered the greatest, then everything from Origins onward is at best lesser and at worst an abomination unto God our Lord. But Silent Hill 4 sits in a weird intermediary space between the two, kind of like how the titular town sits between the worlds of the real and unreal. There are people who love this game, and will go to the depths of hell to defend it, like Harry did for Cheryl. And then there are those who vocally despise it, much like those who vocally despised when the Dead by Daylight creators allegedly got rid of Pyramid Head's cake. Once again, I put these varying emotions down to experimentation with the core Silent Hill formula. Depending on how open one is to these changes, Silent Hill 4 could be the greatest thing to have ever happened to the franchise, or the beginning of the franchise's downfall. And honestly, I don't think either side is right or wrong. What I do think, however, is that maybe a healthy debate could take place here. Maybe there is a way that both sides could see where the other is coming from. That's what I plan to do today by analyzing Silent Hill 4. I will examine various praises and criticisms of the game, and in the end, hopefully we can understand each other a little bit better. We can hopefully engage in some healthy, positive fandom with a franchise that desperately needs it. And in turn, maybe we can have healthier debates when the new Silent Hill games come out. Finally, before I begin, I am happy to inform all of you that this video contains no major story spoilers. So if you have never played Silent Hill 4, you can watch this video and then go form your own opinion. Now, in order to make things cohesive, I figured that the best way to start was by ripping the band-aid off at the outset. I will now give my opinion of Silent Hill 4. It's good. No, really, I respect the hell out of Silent Hill 4. I just don't always enjoy playing it. Okay, the hard part is over. Let's relax. Now, to elaborate, let's return to what I said about formula. I love the formula of the first 3 Silent Hill games. Each of them follow the same basic pattern of checking all the doors, gathering all the supplies, solving the puzzles, and doing all of this in a variety of creepy and often tightly enclosed locations. By experimenting with the core formula that was established in the first 3 Silent Hill games, Silent Hill 4 did succeed in setting quality standards, ones that were mimicked later on by games not only in its own series, but other horror games. However, I found that some of those changes negated those feelings of horror, dread, and depression that were consistently present in the first 3 games, and it happens enough that my enjoyment of the game ebbs and flows. Admittedly, my dissatisfaction with certain things in this game boils down to the subjectivity of horror, and while I didn't like it, I can easily understand why other people like what I don't. But let's get into why I feel it's inconsistent by starting with this game's main selling point. Silent Hill 4 expands upon something hinted at first in Silent Hill 3. You don't have to be in the town of Silent Hill itself to experience its brand of horror. The god of Silent Hill could drop a psychic bomb anywhere on the face of the earth and turn it into an X-rated outtake from a Marilyn Manson music video. In Silent Hill 4, that psychic bomb is dropped not in the isolated town of Silent Hill, but the heavily populated city of Ashfield. In theory, the idea of Silent Hill-type horror affecting you anywhere you go, including a large city, is really interesting and carries a lot of potential. In actual practice, I found that the results varied. In regards to what worked, I think one of the game's greatest successes comes with the titular room. For those who have never played Silent Hill 4, the game follows a man named Henry Townsend, who finds himself locked inside his apartment. Somehow, somebody was able to chain his door shut from the inside, and then escape without a trace, almost as if those chains were put there by a ghost. For several days, more and more seemingly supernatural events tend to occur, with increasing degrees of horror and threat. Thankfully, Henry is eventually able to escape his apartment when holes in his walls appear, but unfortunately, the places he ends up on the other side of those holes all feature the same type of grisly imagery. Both Henry and the gamer conclude that the only way out of this waking nightmare is to investigate clues hinting at the source of these supernatural happenings. In doing so, Henry might survive. The idea that you're not even safe from Silent Hill-type horror in your own home is brilliant in concept and execution. The developers for this game made sure that every part of Henry's apartment served a purpose in regards to the narrative, the gameplay, and the horror. Walking around the apartment with restricted movement space and controls gave me that same sense of claustrophobic horror that I felt when navigating the tight hallways from the first 3 games. Best of all, that claustrophobic feeling is emphasized with this game's addition of the first-person perspective. See, when you have a third-person view, you can see what's around you more easily, which gives you a greater chance of survival. When it's first person, and your movement is more limited, you tend to feel a lot more vulnerable. The moments in the apartment, with the first person perspective, were so effective that you can see how it influenced so many other horror games. It worked so well that famed video game auteur Hideo Kojima intended to bring back that perspective with his Silent Hills game. May it forever rest in peace. But of course, the majority of this game takes place outside the room and features the classic third-person perspective. While some of the locations Henry finds himself in no doubt gave me those classic juicy Silent Hill vibes, I found others very lacking. And honestly, I put this down to Silent Hill 4's main hook, which I talked about before. While the idea of Silent Hill-type horror happening outside the town in random places sounds cool, some locations are more fit for horror and gameplay than others. For example, a hospital and an apartment building are frequent locations in Silent Hill games for a reason. The corridors are tight, limiting your movement, and there's a lot of doors where you don't know what's on the other side of them. And it's even better when there's barely any light. However, An area like the forest, where the spaces are wide open and you can see everything, does not trigger feelings of fear within me. There is no doubt that a forest filled with monsters is scary to some people, but it just didn't do it for me. And it doesn't help that in Silent Hill 4, the camera feels like it is pulled back further than usual, making it easier to see everything that is going to attack you. Now, some people might reasonably retort that the first 3 games featured wide open spaces with easily visible monsters as well. Yes, but those open spaces were strategically placed at ideal intervals. You would be in a dark enclosed space, and then you would be in a wider space where you can breathe and feel less vulnerable. Then you would be enclosed again. Then you could breathe again. Repeat ad nauseum. With Silent Hill 4, that formula, that rhythm, just wasn't there for me. Sometimes the gameplay and the horror work. Sometimes it's improved upon. But between those moments, there's a lot of stuff that feels like it doesn't fit the rhythm. It's a bunch of well-designed levels with a classic Silent Hill feel, mixed with experimental levels that will vary in appeal. And to make matters worse, you have to revisit all of the levels one more time in the second half of the game. So if there are 1 or 2 levels you aren't fond of, like me with the forest and the subway, you will be in those levels for about 35 to 40% of the game. Granted, these criticisms are all related to level design. What about something that tends to be reliably strong in Silent Hill games, like the world building and the characters? Well, again, here we have a mixed bag. While I am able for the most part to understand why somebody would like the things that I don't like in Silent Hill 4, where I struggle to do this the most is with the game's characters, particularly Henry. With the protagonists in the first 3 games, there was an emotional hook that invested us in their journey. Heather struggled with the truth of her heritage in Silent Hill 3. James was struggling to deal with the death of his wife in Silent Hill 2. Harry was a father trying to save his daughter in Silent Hill 1. Henry? Well, to me, he's about as interesting as an empty tube of chapstick. He provokes absolutely no emotional involvement from me. He, like almost all the other characters in Silent Hill 4, are just random people who got hit by that aforementioned psychic bomb at the same time. Again, having this type of horror happen at random times to random people is cool in theory. But in addition to that, there needs to be something about these characters that makes us want them to survive. The best argument I've heard in favor of someone like Henry is that because he's a blank slate, the gamer can use him as an avatar. They can insert themselves into his shoes and thus experience the world around him more intensely. Kind of similar to how one lives vicariously through the protagonist in the Persona games. But even in those games, the characters surrounding the protagonist are interesting, and they make you feel involved in their lives. In regards to Silent Hill 4, you barely get any of that with characters like Eileen, or Cynthia, or Jasper. In the end, these characters are mostly soulless tools, ones that are used to service the game's central mystery and the villain who is perpetuating it, instead of serving the narrative. To its credit though, sacrificing those characters in order to prop up the villain, perversely, paid off. Early on in Silent Hill 4, you find out that all the supernatural occurrences in Henry's apartment and the city around him are related to a character named Walter Sullivan. I won't spoil why that is, don't worry. What I will say is, without a doubt, he's probably my favorite villain in the series next to Pyramid Head and God. His backstory, and the way it affects everything supernatural that happens in the game is somehow heart-wrenching and yet repulsive at the same time. He is totally justified in his anger at the world, but he is nauseating with his methods of revenge. You wish he could be helped, but at the same time, you realize he is too far gone for that. And anytime he is encountered, you know you have to run in the opposite direction. And those that don't do that right away will almost certainly die. This is certainly the case for a lot of the characters in Silent Hill 4. And while they might not be interesting themselves, their interactions with Walter elevate him to peak video game villainy. I have to confess to something about Walter. I almost never get scared by horror games, but there were a few times where Walter would just randomly show up during the game and start shooting at you with double pistols. In these moments, my heart completely sank, and I uttered expletives that I can't say on YouTube without getting demonetized. In function, he's kind of like Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, more so in the remake, but his presence isn't always known from footsteps or sound cues. A lot of the time, he just appears there and just starts squeezing them triggers, man, and believe me, it's as pants-shitting now as it was back in 2004. Thankfully, one thing about the first 3 games that carries over unadulterated is the symbolism of the monsters and their relation to either the main character or the villain. Without spoiling anything, virtually all of the monsters are a manifestation of Walter's psyche, and when you learn about what parts of his mind they symbolize, they add deeper and darker layers to his madness and sadism. And of course, the horror of Walter's mind is given greater dimension with the consistently immaculate creature design. While maybe not as iconic or as creepy as the designs from the first 3 games, the distance between them is negligible to the point of unimportance. Even if Silent Hill 4 doesn't play the way I would like at all times, it's stuff like the symbolism and the villains that keep me coming back to this game. And of course, what else makes you feel more at home with a Silent Hill game than Akira Yamaoka's soundtrack? It isn't to the level of Silent Hill 2's soundtrack, yes, but that's an impossible bar to reach for me because that's my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. That said, I would say Silent Hill 4's soundtrack is either on par with or better than the soundtracks in Silent Hill 1 and 3. All the tracks provoke that trademark feeling of inner calm and contemplation, the kind that is so immaculate that it has become mandatory for every YouTube video essay ever made to include it. Seriously, everybody from Super Eyepatch Wolf to Ragnaroks to myself overuse the Silent Hill music for a reason. They are musical mantras that aid in meditation, and Silent Hill 4 continues that tradition with virtually all of its tracks. Before I conclude, I want to mention one last criticism I have of the game. As many of my regular followers know from my Silent Hill mythology videos, there is a great deal of technical, emotional, and psychological depth to the first 3 games. More so in 1 and 2, but to a solid degree in 3. By this, I mean there are several references to religion, psychoanalysis, existential philosophy, and they are all interwoven beautifully with the basic story. I haven't done videos on Silent Hill 4 specifically because the game barely has any of that. It's not non-existent. There are some cool references to the occult, like with the black, white, and red tablets, and potentially with the 21 Sacraments. But aside from that, not much else. But even I have to admit, that sort of thing appeals mostly to hardcore Silent Hill fans like myself. The average player doesn't care that the name of the Green Lion Antique Shop is a reference to alchemy, or that Maria in Silent Hill 2 is the Jungian Anima. They just want to be scared. And you know what? That's fine. Silent Hill 4 is more than competent at doing that. To summarize in simple terms, Silent Hill 4 is a platter of different horror tastes meshing together, and depending on who you are, all of them might appeal to you, half of them might, or maybe none at all. Unlike me, who didn't like all the levels, or the characters, or the game's pace, I can easily understand why people do, and I celebrate that. After all, art is subjective. And aside from maybe comedy, there's nothing more subjective than horror. In that vein, I want to ask you guys, are you a fan of Silent Hill 4? Do you respect it like I do, even if you don't fully enjoy it? Or do you really dislike it? Let me know in the comment section below, and please, we're all Silent Hill fans here. There's no need to get heated. Please give this video a like if you liked it. Hey, I made this video with a literal broken hand. One like equals 1 prayer for Max. Make sure to subscribe for more Silent Hill content coming down the pipeline, including maybe a new Silent Hill mythology video. By the way, if you like the type of in-depth analysis that I do on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon or joining my YouTube members section. I will leave links to all of that in the description box below. Finally, special thanks to Cyan for stepping up to help me edit this video with my broken hand, and to all the people who volunteered. You guys are legends, and I love you dearly. Until next time, stay yellow.